This offseason, there are two players who could change the way we look at the New York Mets next season that are potentially there for the taking. You have Aaron Judge in free agency and Shohei Ohtani on the trade market. Which pie in the sky dream scenario is more realistic? Which fit is better? We're going to dive into every element of that on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now we're finally talking Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge, which might be a theme throughout the offseason depending on how available these guys are. And at some point, we'll have to dive into the obvious elements from each guy. For Ohtani, it's what's it going to take to get him. For Judge, it's, all right, is he going to sign with a team other than the Yankees, or are they going to come to terms on a deal? There is a window where these two sides could negotiate where maybe the Yankees hit him over the head with an offer so great he can't refuse it, or maybe he hits free agency. It seems like it's really tough to get a read on what this guy wants to do, but simply comparing these two players and trying to get a sense of who would bring the bigger impact to the Mets, let's start with their F4s since Shohei Ohtani came in, because Ohtani gets the double dip, right? He gets the F4 as a hitter, also the one as a pitcher, but then again, he doesn't have any added benefit of playing defense outside, of course, pitching. Combine his hitting and his pitching, and it is a 22.9 F4 dating back to his rookie year in 2018, played 581 games as a DH. Aaron Judge, as an outfielder, 547 games, technically a little bit less, but if you look at plate appearances, Judge, we're a little close to about 100 more. His F4, though, is 27.9, so he's been worth 5 additional wins than Shohei Ohtani. You look at, those numbers, they don't even factor in his 2017 season, which was his rookie of the year season, where he had an 8.8 F4 and also 52 home runs. But simply looking at the period where both of these guys were in the American League, technically vying for MVP awards against each other, and Aaron Judge has hit 288, 392 on base, 581 slugging. Shohei Ohtani has hit 267, 355 on base, 532 slugging. So it's clear who the better hitter is. In that same time span, Judge has 164 home runs, the most in baseball. Ohtani has 127. So big drop off there of 37 home runs. Judge has a 164 WRC plus. That measures based on a league average of 100, a 164 WRC plus, 64% better than your league average hitter. He leads all of baseballs and home runs, as I mentioned. Second behind Mike Trout with that WRC plus of 164. And his 27.9 F4 is third behind Trout and Mookie Betts. Betts being the best player in baseball since 2019 with an exact even 30 F4. But if we were to look at Judge's entire career, take his rookie year in 2017 into account, we're also dropping off his 2016 season where he had a cup of coffee that went abysmally wrong for him. You look at 2017 on, best player in baseball. That's what the F4 would suggest, 36.7, because you tack on that extra 8.8 that he had in that 2017 season, 216 home runs, far and away the best. So if we're simply talking about the Mets lineup next season, there's no doubt who the better player is here. It's Aaron Judge, but then you have to factor in Shohei Ohtani answers two different needs at once. It's the potential, second ace to a Max Scherzer if you weren't to re-sign Jacob deGrom, and a full-time DH who is far better than anything the Mets put out there this season. You no longer have to worry about a platoon with Daniel Vogelback and Mark Vientos, or Daniel Vogelback and Darren Ruff, or having a Eduardo Escobar be your DH because Brett Beatty's your third baseman. Now your DH is solved. Your at least second starter is solved. If the Mets get crazy, give a big bag of cash to DeGrom and trade for Ohtani, they have in unbelievably wealth of riches when it comes to the rotation. I don't think that's likely because even though Ohtani is technically cheaper this year than he theoretically will be on the market, where who knows what he could command as a two-way player. It's unprecedented. $50 million could be an underpay. How valuable that dude could be. But and I'm talking about per season. And I know that sounds ludicrous, but I mean, look, if Max Scherzer gets $43.3 million as a pitcher and Shohei Ohtani could be as dominant, but it can also hit for you, I just don't know what you compute on that. With that said, I think his arbitration number was already agreed on. It was $30 million. So he's going to be expensive regardless, even this season. So you look at these two guys, and they both would fill direct needs. They both would move the needle significantly. And the matter here is just the cost of acquisition, which, again, when we dive into each of them specifically, we'll get into those details a little bit more on a future podcast. But that is one concern, and we'll dive into that in the final segment. But also it's the fact of how do they fit on this roster with what's in place, and that's what I want to discuss next. Before we get to that, though, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info this season. Find the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The World Series about to begin. The Phillies are plus 165 at BetOnline. The Astros at minus 190. This is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so who fits the roster better in 2023? Is it Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani? I think an interesting place to start here is actually defensively, because one thing that Aaron Judge brings that Shohei Ohtani does not is a glove into the outfield, and that actually is important based on the current roster construction of the Mets. And you look at this past season, he actually played more center than right, but he's been a right fielder predominantly throughout his career. When it comes to outs above average, he was worth 2 outs above average in right this year, 1 out above average in center for his career, has never posted a negative outs above average number. Altogether, 26 outs above average, best year, 2017, 10 outs above average out in right. 2019, 9 outs above average, and then he's been, between 1, 2, and 3 all the other years, but always above average. You look at defensive runs saved, 61 defensive runs saved out in right field throughout his career. Last season, it was 11. This year, it was 2. In center field, he has been just average based on defensive run save, but this year, slightly above with 1 defensive run save. Also graded out positive in ultimate zone rating and even with his defensive WAR. And again, he was playing more center than right. This is actually an element that I think people aren't talking about enough when we are going through the Shohei Ohtani pipe dream and maybe an Aaron Judge pipe dream, is how do they actually fit into the lineup every day. For Shohei Ohtani, he's your DH, and maybe you have to go to a 6-man rotation to accommodate him, which is fine because he's a really, really good pitcher. And if the Mets have a Max Scherzer, and even if they lean veteran heavy, and let's just say they bring back Carrasco and Chris Bassett because they're getting Ohtani and they let DeGrom walk, and their rotation next year is, a combination of, Scherzer, Ohtani, Bassett, Carrasco, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Joey Lucchesi, maybe another, swingman vet gets brought into the mix. They do all that. Obviously, he's great in the rotation. But in the lineup, it's a little bit of a clunky fit. And the reason I say that is because you have Daniel Vogelback. And that does not prevent you from getting a talent like Shohei Ohtani. This is once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to acquire a player that's going to be potentially your ace and could be your best hitter in any given season. That's unheard of. But we're just trying to dive into the best allocation of resources here, and the fit on the roster is important. And you have a DH option in Vogelback, you have another one in Vientos, you have one in Eduardo Escobar, you even have one in Francisco Alvarez, theoretically. Not to mention, DH is the easiest position to fill in all of baseball. You just need a hitter. So you can go out and you could sign Jose Abreu this offseason to I don't know how much money he's going to command. Is it much more than $15 million? I don't know. This is just me off the top of my head. I haven't really dive into those numbers just yet. But if you could just get Jose Abreu for a 1-year contract and not trade a bunch of players to get Ohtani to be your DH and you re-sign DeGrom, I mean, how valuable is it to get him? And we're not discussing Ohtani as a free agent. That would be a completely different conversation. This is trading for Shohei Ohtani. Aaron Judge fills a massive need on your team. If you lose Brandon Nimmo in free agency, and obviously if you sign Judge, you would not be retaining Nimmo. Yeah, you have a center fielder. If you want to play him in center, most likely you'll let him play right field where he really is best. You slide Marte back into center, and you hope Marte can hang out there for at least a year, if not 2. Canna is only on your books for 1 more season, so your outfield would be Canna, Marte, and Judge. And then maybe beyond that season, you could put Marte back where he won his 2 gold gloves in left field. You have your 2 corners situated, and then maybe you get a center fielder the following offseason, or who knows. Maybe Alex Ramirez shoots through your farm system this season. He was in high A this year. I don't know if it's necessarily realistic to say 2024 he's there, but there is a chance that if he has a great start to the season in high A and then he tears the cover off the ball in double A, he could be knocking on the door come 2024. So you never really know, and Marte might still have 2 more seasons of center field left in him, and you could just have Marte and Judge, kind of manning those 2 premium defensive outfield positions. But I'll tell you what, Aaron Judge in right field with Marte in center, I think your defense, if not stay the same, might even improve than where it was at with Nimmo and Marte out there. So you fill that need defensively. You replace Nimmo in that respect, and you replace him with the guy that's been the best player in baseball since 2017 based on F4. A guy that was just the best hitter in baseball, breaking Maris's record in the American League, the franchise record, 62 homers. Had an F4 over 11. A guy that was worth 5 extra wins to Shohei Ohtani since Ohtani debuted, and he was double dipping. The more I look at it, the more I examine the fit, if it all comes down to which move you're more willing to go all in on, signing Aaron Judge for just cash makes a little bit more sense to me than going out and acquiring Ohtani. But I want to discuss that wrinkle a little bit more in just a minute here. And obviously, I just think the positional fit makes more sense as well. But we'll dive into who's the more realistic get, who actually could be attained here, because there's also the element of everyone in baseball is going to be looking at Judge this offseason as a free agent, and maybe it is easier to acquire Ohtani a year early than to wait till he's a free agent the following season. So we'll dive into all of that in just a minute. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Here we are to close out the show. Which player is the more realistic target this offseason? And honestly, the answer is neither of them is realistic. It's not realistic to think you're going to poach the best player in baseball this season from a team in the Yankees that certainly had the financial capabilities to retain him. A team that has had him since his debut, who should be looking to hang on to him so that he can have his jersey retired and he can be a New York Yankee on his Hall of Fame plaque. But maybe they pissed him off by not signing him prior to the season, and now maybe Judge wants to test the open waters, and if he does and you get to a bidding war, no reason that Steve Cohen can't win that. And the more I look at what's out there and the potential to add a player like Aaron Judge to pair with Pete Alonso and to imagine a lineup where you could go next year and say, all right, Jeff McNeil's batting leadoff, Starling Marte's batting second, Judge is batting third, Alonso's batting fourth, and Francisco Lindor is batting fifth on your team, while you still have Brett Baty, who could factor into the equation over Eduardo Escobar. You still have Francisco Alvarez on your team, and you still have guys like Mark Canha who can give you good at-bats, Luis Guillorme. So you have depth there. You even have Mark Vientos and Daniel Vogelback. I mean, on that team, does Daniel Vogelback hit seventh? I don't even know. He was hitting fifth at times this year, fourth or fifth, and sometimes, up in that middle part of the lineup behind Alonso as the insurance, or as the protection. The fit just makes a lot more sense with Aaron Judge, but then it's what's more realistic, and the Yankees obviously are all in on retaining their guy, you would imagine. The Giants apparently will not be outbid on Judge. You can imagine the Dodgers apparently are in on him, and they might move Mookie Betts to second base, which would be ridiculous if they ended up having Mookie Betts, Aaron Judge, and Freddie Freeman on the same freaking team. That'd be insane. I don't know if I really don't believe either of these moves is realistic. That's why I've been hesitant to discuss them, even though I know that's what everyone is thinking about right now among the fan base. And, again, we'll probably spend future podcasts as we actually get into free agency, diving a little bit deeper into each case. How much money was Judge going to get? What's it going to take to acquire Ohtani? For Ohtani, you had the Billy Epler connection, though. He was the one that got him to sign with the Angels. You basically don't have to worry about whether he wants to play for you. You just have to make the trade with the Angels. And you have a prospect in Francisco Alvarez that's a trump card right now. It's only for 1 year of control. So the package would be interesting for that, for a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime player, but unlimited control, with also the pressure of having to sign him to who knows how big of a contract he's going to get. I keep coming back to the neither being realistic. I can't say that in a sentence with a straight face that, hey, it's realistic that Shohei Ohtani will be pitching in a Mets uniform next year, and that Judge will be the starting right fielder. It's pie in the sky. But of the pie in the sky scenarios, I think in some respects, Ohtani is a more realistic outcome, because I think that the market to acquire him is going to be scarce, in the sense that there's just not that many teams that can put together that offer. The Mets are one of them. But that's also me hedging a little bit on the fact that I just think Judge is going to go back to the Yankees. I still believe that's going to be the case, but you never know. So I think if the entire point of today's exercise was to decide who I would rather see in a Mets uniform, Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani, it's Aaron Judge, which I know sounds crazy, but I think it comes down to many factors. It's the fact that he's a better offensive player. He's a better positional fit with the guys that are in place, and he's not going to cost Francisco Alvarez or Brett Baty to acquire. It's simply cash. So outside of bringing back the Grom, I think Aaron Judge has to be squarely atop your list of free agent targets here. And you know what? I would not be surprised at all if he's even above DeGrom and Steve Cohen has Judge circled as the number one priority for this Mets team this offseason. And he did that last year with Max Scherzer. So who knows what could happen. But that's going to be all for today's episode of Locked On Mets this week on Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. All of it is available on the Odyssey app, or YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.